The vigilant Fury hummed through the cold darkness of space, its sleek metallic hull reflecting the dim starlight scattered across the cosmic debris field. The crew, seasoned veterans of the Galactic Empire, had been tracking a stray probe through the wreckage of what appeared to be a meteor swarm. 4 days, they chased its erratic signals, frustrated by the mysterious object's elusiveness. However, when their scanners finally locked onto the probe, it wasn't the only thing their sensors picked up. "Commander, there's something else." A cryopod, floating nearby, Ensign Thaw reported, her large, almond-shaped eyes narrowing as the strange readings flickered on her screen. Commander Terran Vel rose from his command seat, his tall, muscular frame cutting an imposing figure as he crossed the bridge to peer over Thaw's shoulder. His violet eyes gleamed with curiosity, the faint ridges on his forehead twitching in interest. "A cryopod? Out here in the middle of nowhere? Secure it. Bring it aboard." The vigilant Fury's gravitic tractor beams hummed to life, gently pulling the cryopod toward the ship's docking bay. Once inside, a small group of soldiers crowded around it, their sharp features and sleek uniforms standing out against the utilitarian backdrop of the hangar. "This is gonna be interesting," one of the soldiers muttered, eyeing the frost-covered pod with amusement. "I bet it's some kind of relic. Maybe from one of those pre-collapse colonies. Or maybe it's just junk," another scoffed, though his curiosity was just as piqued as the others. As the frost slowly cleared from the glass surface, revealing the figure inside, silence fell over the group. A collective gasp followed. "You've got to be kidding me," whispered a soldier, his wide eyes fixed on the being encased within. "It's a human?" Commander Vel stepped forward, his expression a mix of disbelief and contempt. "I thought they were extinct." "They were." Dr. Myra Kell, the ship's xenobiologist, joined the group, her piercing pink eyes narrowing in amusement. She swept her long, iridescent black hair over her shoulder as she examined the pod's contents. "This one must have been in stasis for centuries. A relic from a failed species." The sight of the human in the cryopod, preserved as if frozen in time, sparked a series of chuckles among the crew. "Wake him up," Commander Vel ordered, a cruel smile curling his lips. "Let's see what's left of humanity." The lab's sterile white lights reflected off the smooth surface of the cryopod as the de-thawing sequence began. Hissing sounds filled the room as gas escaped from the seals, and the frost coating the pod dissipated, revealing more details of the man inside. He was tall, muscular, with an intensity that remained even in his frozen state. Dr. Kell watched closely, her amusement barely concealed as she pressed a button, initiating the awakening protocol. "Let's see if this relic can still walk," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The man's eyelids fluttered open. Sergeant Ryan Carter, the last surviving member of Pandora Unit, was awake. His vision blurred, and his mind struggled to process the unfamiliar surroundings. Alien faces loomed above him, their expressions ranging from curious to mocking. Ryan's training kicked in, instincts flaring as memories flooded back. He had been part of Earth's last line of defense, the Pandora Unit, frozen in time until the day he was needed again. But this was not Earth. The faces surrounding him were grotesque yet beautiful in their alien way. Their long limbs, sharp features, and silky hair all felt foreign and menacing. One alien in particular, Dr. Kell, hovered close, her eyes drinking in every detail of him as though he were a specimen on display. Her sharp, claw-like fingers traced the edges of the pod, her lips curling into a smug smile. "Fascinating," she purred. "So fragile, yet they managed to survive on that hostile planet of theirs. How quaint." Ryan's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent, assessing his surroundings. He was weak from the cryostasis, his muscles screaming as he tried to move. He knew he had to bide his time. These aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Dr. Kell leaned closer, her breath warm against the glass. "Welcome back to the galaxy, human. You're no longer in your little sandbox of a planet. Now you're our plaything." Ryan's mind was already working through the haze. He would have to play along, at least for now. But as he looked into Dr. Kell's predatory eyes, he knew one thing for certain. They thought he was weak. Helpless. But they were wrong. So very wrong. The sterile white walls of the lab gleamed, casting an almost blinding glow that reflected off every surface. Sergeant Ryan Carter slowly sat up, his muscles stiff from the years spent in cryo, but his mind was sharp, processing every detail of the situation. The aliens surrounding him didn't seem to realize the threat he posed. Instead, they laughed, exchanging smug glances and snide comments as though he were some amusing artifact of a forgotten time. Ryan's gaze swept the room. The exits were guarded, though not heavily. The soldiers stood relaxed, underestimating him, a mistake they'd regret. His hands clenched slightly, the sensation of blood flowing back into his fingers bringing a surge of control back to his body. "Commander Val," Dr. Cal called over her shoulder, her voice tinged with mockery. "The subject is awake, though I doubt he'll be much trouble. Look at him, pale with... like all humans." Commander Val approached, his violet eyes gleaming with a predatory curiosity. "So," he said, leaning closer to Ryan, "the last of a dying species. How does it feel to be the relic of a forgotten world, human?" Ryan said nothing, his eyes locking with Vel's. He could see the arrogance behind the commander's smirk, the certainty that he was nothing more than a specimen to be studied. Ryan's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smirk of his own. Let them believe that. For now. Dr. Kell moved in, her body close to Ryan's as she examined his vitals. Her fingers grazed his chest, sending a jolt of distaste through him. "His heart rate is elevated," she murmured, tracing the cold metal of a diagnostic scanner over his skin. "Could it be fear, I wonder? Or perhaps excitement?" She smiled wickedly, enjoying her perceived control over him. Ryan's jaw tightened. He could feel the disdain radiating off her. She saw him as an inferior creature, a plaything, something to dissect and laugh at. But deep down, she didn't realize the mistake she was making by getting too close. As she leaned in further, her scent, a mixture of foreign spices and pheromones, was strong, almost intoxicating. Her sharp pink eyes gleamed with something beyond just curiosity, a perverse fascination with this strange human relic she had so easily mocked. Her lips curled into a smile, revealing teeth just a little too sharp. "You're an amusing little thing, aren't you?" Ryan's pulse remained steady. He had been trained to handle far worse situations than this, to manipulate, deceive, and dismantle his enemies from the inside. Let them think they were in control. Let them think they had him under their thumb. Dr. Kell's hand lingered on his chest for a moment too long. Her fingers trailed over the hard muscles beneath his skin, and her smirk grew. "I expected humans to be more frail. Perhaps there's more to you than meets the eye, relic." Ryan's gaze flicked toward her, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "You have no idea." Dr. Kell's amusement faltered, her brow furrowing slightly as she caught the edge in his voice. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. But she quickly masked it, stepping back with a dismissive laugh. "We'll see about that. Run the next test." One of the lab technicians stepped forward, injecting Ryan with a glowing blue serum. The moment the needle pierced his skin, he felt a surge of warmth, the foreign substance spreading through his veins. His mind swirled, trying to fight off the dizziness that followed. They were testing his physiology, his limits, probing for weaknesses. But they wouldn't find any. Ryan leaned back against the pod, his expression carefully neutral as the serum coursed through him. He felt his senses sharpen, his vision clearer, the world around him slowing down. His body was adapting faster than they expected, processing the substance in ways their primitive tests couldn't predict. Dr. Kell and Commander Vel watched closely, their expressions intrigued but still dismissive. Ryan could feel the tension in the room shift slightly as the test continued, his vitals remaining steady despite their attempts to push him to the edge. "I think we're done here," Commander Vel said after a long moment, his voice casual but laced with disdain. "There's nothing remarkable about him. Another failed experiment." Dr. Kell's lips pursed, her eyes narrowing as she stared at Ryan, as though searching for something she couldn't quite see. "Perhaps," she murmured, "but I'm not convinced. There's something different about this one." Ryan's pulse quickened, though not out of fear. He was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to act. They thought they had him contained, but they didn't understand the kind of predator they had just woken. Commander Vel turned, waving dismissively at the guards. "Take him to the holding cell. We'll figure out what to do with him later." As the guards moved toward Ryan, he allowed them to place the restraints on his wrists, his mind racing with potential escape routes. He could already see the flaws in their security, the patterns in their movements. He would use their arrogance against them, but not yet. Patience was a weapon, and he intended to wield it with precision. As they led him down the cold, sterile corridors of the ship, Ryan's eyes flicked to the security systems, the layout of the ship's internal structure. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information could be used. Dr. Kell followed behind, her eyes still fixed on him, a mixture of fascination and desire flickering in her gaze. She was drawn to him, though she wouldn't admit it. Ryan could see the way her fingers twitched, the way her gaze lingered on his body, the perverse curiosity that simmered beneath her cold, scientific exterior. In the confines of his holding cell, Ryan finally allowed himself a small smile. They thought they had him trapped, but in reality, they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. He would play their game for now, but when the time came, he would tear their world apart from the inside. This was only the beginning. The dim, sterile light of the cell flickered as Sergeant Ryan Carter sat quietly, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the floor beneath him. The restraints they had placed on his wrists were more symbolic than practical. His mind, sharp as ever, was already working through the final steps of his escape. His captors, too consumed by their arrogance, had no idea the chaos they had invited aboard their ship. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, soft but deliberate. Ryan's ears perked up, his muscles tensing instinctively. Dr. Myra Kell appeared at the cell's entrance, her sharp eyes gleaming with that same perverse curiosity she had displayed earlier. She approached slowly, the guard at her side watching closely, though he too seemed to be lulled by the ship's sense of security. "I've been thinking about you, human," Dr. Kell said, her voice a low purr as she approached the cell bars. Her hands rested on the cold metal, her pink eyes locking onto Ryan's. "You're far more interesting than I anticipated." Ryan remained silent, observing her. She leaned in closer, her lips curling into a smile. "There's something about you, something primal." Her voice dropped an octave, becoming more intimate, more dangerous. "I can't stop wondering what it would be like to break you." Ryan's eyes met hers, unblinking. He could feel the heat of her breath through the bars, her fingers lingering dangerously close to his skin. She was taunting him, testing him, and he knew exactly how to play along. "Do you really think you can break me?" His voice was soft, but there was a dark edge to it that made Dr. Kell's smile falter for a moment. Her eyes narrowed, but she quickly recovered, smirking as she straightened up. "You're already broken, human. You just don't know it yet." Ryan allowed himself a small smile, one that sent a shiver down her spine. "We'll see about that." The guard beside her shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. Dr. Kell, however, was too entranced by Ryan to notice. She reached for a button on the control panel, and with a hiss, the cell door slid open. "You're coming with me," she ordered, her voice cold but laced with that same underlying hunger. "I want to run a few more tests." Ryan stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers as he stepped out of the cell. The guard moved closer, but Ryan's gaze remained fixed on Dr. Kell. She enjoyed this dance, the power dynamic, the illusion of control. But that illusion was about to shatter. As they walked through the ship's winding corridors, Ryan's mind raced, calculating every possible move, every potential point of weakness. The layout of the ship was ingrained in his memory, and he knew exactly where to strike. He just needed the right moment. They entered a smaller, darker lab this time, more secluded. The guards stood near the door as Dr. Kell led Ryan to the center of the room, her hands gliding over the cold metal instruments laid out on the table. "Strap him in," she ordered the guard. The guard moved closer, reaching for Ryan's wrist. In that split second, Ryan made his move. With lightning speed, Ryan grabbed the guard's arm, twisting it behind his back in one swift motion. The guard let out a strangled cry as Ryan disarmed him, driving his knee into the guard's back and sending him sprawling to the floor. Dr. Kell's eyes widened in shock, her body frozen in place as Ryan turned toward her, the guard's weapon now in his hand. Didn't see that coming, did you? Ryan's voice was calm, but the threat in it was undeniable. Dr. Kell backed up slowly, her hands raised in a futile attempt to placate him. You don't want to do this. We can. Ryan moved forward, cutting her off with a cold, predatory gaze. You thought you were playing me, but I've been in control this whole time. Dr. Kell's breath caught in her throat as Ryan backed her up against the wall, his face inches from hers. The smug arrogance that had once filled her eyes was now replaced with fear. Ryan could see it, smell it, taste it. You're afraid, he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. You thought you were the predator, but you've been prey from the moment you woke me up. Dr. Kell's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Ryan raised the weapon to her throat, his eyes locked on hers. He leaned in closer, his voice a chilling whisper. Now, he growled, you're going to help me, or I'm going to tear this ship apart. Dr. Kell's hands trembled, her sharp nails digging into the walls behind her as she struggled to find her voice. I can get you out. I can disable the alarms. Just, don't kill me. Ryan smiled, a cold, merciless smile that sent a wave of terror through her. Good girl. Now move. With shaky hands, Dr. Kell moved toward the control panel, her fingers tapping out a series of commands. The ship's internal defenses went offline, alarms deactivated, and the security system became vulnerable. Ryan kept the weapon trained on her as the doors to the lab slid open. He knew the crew would notice something was wrong soon, but by then, it would be too late. He had what he needed. Dr. Kell turned back to him, her face pale, her body trembling with fear. I did what you asked. Please, let me go. Ryan studied her for a moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Then, without a word, he raised the weapon and fired. Dr. Kell crumpled to the floor, her body hitting the cold metal with a sickening thud. Ryan stepped over her, his expression emotionless as he made his way through the now vulnerable ship. The crew hadn't even realized their doom was upon them. He moved swiftly, taking out guards as he went, disabling key systems, and ensuring that the ship would never make it out of this sector. As the Vigilant Fury began to drift, its engines sabotaged and its crew scattered in disarray, Ryan Carter looked out at the cold expanse of space. He was no longer a relic of a forgotten world. He was the last weapon of humanity, and the galaxy would soon learn to fear his kind once more. The end.